Okay, great.
Great.
Are you heading out?
I know.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
I'll send Megan to open it up again.
Sounds good. I'm just gonna give it 30 seconds to another minute, and then we'll go ahead and jump in. And by the way, Carol, do you have a smartphone?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so you might want to have that out. Christine, you've already got your smartphone.
Yeah, I have it right here in my hand. Do
Okay.
I need to be, do you want to see me or I'm not really good? I'm not really good on Zoom.
No problem. It's more like we're gonna try to use some of your voice recognition on your phone.
Okay.
And I'm not sure how, if you've ever used that or not, but that's gonna be the starter.
No, well, I have two sons that are software engineers.
Oh, okay. They can probably help you.
Yeah, when I need help, my son can get on my computer with remote because he more or less has set it all up for me.
Gotcha. Okay, I'm gonna post that link in the chat for Sagemaker Labs. And if you walk through that after the session and request an account, what it does is it gives you access to their library of labs. And the labs are pretty intuitive. Most of them you can walk through and, step by step. Some of them are really advanced, and unless you've had a math background, it can be tough. But if you need specifics on which lab, I can certainly, after the session, I can link you to the ones we did.
Okay, I have to type this in on my
Yeah, you don't have to do it now. It's just more reference, for later. And we don't need it tonight, by the way. This is just from the last session that we were using.
So how do I get this on my computer?
You
Just
can do
click
everything
it?
from a browser. You can run Sagemaker Labs from a browser. You don't need to have any special software installed.
No, while I'm on Zoom, I don't know whether or not if I clicked it, if it would take me out of Zoom.
No, it won't.
Oh, okay.
It won't. All right, I don't see anyone else, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, Carol, Christine or Christina?
Christina.
Christina. Okay. Thanks for coming back. And today we're going to be discussing natural language processing and how it's used in the business world, how people are using it for recreation, for translation, for various reasons. And I mentioned the smartphone thing because most people have access to natural language processing, even if they don't really think about it. So if you have an Amazon Alexa at your house, or if you have I forgot what they call the Google model, but there's also a Google Smart Home Assistant. There's Siri, and there's various ones out there. So does everybody have an Apple phone?
Now I have an Android.
You have an Android? So for yours, it's probably going to be the Google Assistant. Let me look that up real quick because I actually don't know the name.
Yeah, I have Google. Yeah.
So I think for yours, you would probably say, "Hey, Google." And then if it's set up, then it would respond. So I'm going to do one real quick live and just use my Siri. I'm going to say, "Hey, Siri." Oops, locked. "Hey, Siri, what's the weather today?"
It's currently clear and 77 degrees. Expect cloudy skies starting tonight. Temperatures will be fairly consistent, averaging about 72 degrees.
Okay, so that's a pretty basic response. And something to note about these phones that process language is that when you first get them, I don't know if you realize this, but it has to train to your voice. So it has to get used to your accent, your tone. And when you say, "Hey, Siri," if it doesn't respond right away, then you have to do it, "Hey, Siri." Tell me a funny joke.
I'd tell a chemistry joke, but I'm not sure what reaction I'll get. I cleaned out the attic with my friend yesterday. Now I can't get the cobwebs out of his hair.
Really cheesy jokes, but what I've noticed is if you joke more often with Siri or with other assistants, they tend to get your humor a little more, and they know that you're asking for jokes. But if you don't ask any, the language processing system takes a while for it to like actually do anything well. So when you have time, I urge you all to like play with that a little bit, because there's actually some interesting things that happen when you talk to these things and they start to learn who you are. It's a little scary. One thing personally, what I mentioned, we have Alexa at home, and my kids will occasionally ask Alexa, about comic book characters or a cartoon that they like, or they'll say like, what year is it? Like they don't understand what year it is, so they're like, okay, what year is it? They'll just ask basic questions. But something interesting that I read about a child psychologist and them discussing how children learn. Back in the day, people would read books and they would do it regimented. You read every evening or you read at school. But now children have access to these things like Siri and Alexa, and they can immediately ask something and get a response right away. It's a really new way to learn. And actually, when the brain is craving something and you want to know something, that's the best time to teach your brain. But if you're at home and you're kind of tired, you're like, I'm going to read because it's your routine. You don't typically pick up on things as easily because your brain isn't in that state of mind. So it's a really interesting way of learning. And a lot of companies now, businesses have taken those same kind of mindsets and they add plugins to your Alexa. And you can say, I want Sirius to be added to my Alexa. And now you can talk to Alexa about what kind of music you want to play. And it'll know the patterns of music that you play, when you listen to the news and all these other things. So it's becoming very integrated into our pop culture, our society. It is obviously not advanced and growing quickly, but it's something that's of interest to many organizations, even internal organizations. Like I do work for Eli Lilly Pharmaceutical. They have their own Alexa skill that they build in for their chemists. So while their chemists are doing experiments in labs, they have their own libraries and sets of things they can ask quickly. They don't remember everything. There's a lot to remember if you're a chemist, and they can quickly just ask, Alexa, hey, what is the number of atoms in this chemical? Or, I don't know, anything specific to chemistry, but it's a quick way to get information. So that's the main thing I want to emphasize. Jump on the slide real quick. So what is natural language processing? It's a manipulation of language, speech, text by using software. The main purpose of it is you can communicate speaking much easier than you can writing. It's much faster. Your mind can process the thought and get it out faster than you can writing or doing some other form of communication. So being able to tell a machine or software what you need to do or what you want to know about is a really quick and easy user interface. So that's why it's such a big interest, a big topic nowadays. Machines can translate languages, so that's a really big thing. I went overseas a couple years ago. Many people were using their phones to translate, and the phone would speak to the people there that speak their native language. That changes a lot of things. The communication barrier is taken down, and it's not always exact, but for the most part, it worked well. Anywhere you went, people can understand what you're saying. They get the general idea. One thing that's really interesting nowadays is social media is used to for personal, or not personal, but for public relations. So companies will put a lot of information out there. They'll put out a press release. Individuals will put information out there and try to, become an expert in their field. And there's a lot more information out there that can be gathered to understand what the general sentiment of a certain topic is. So looking at natural language processing, if you were able to take a quick snapshot of, let's say, what's the general sentiment politically right now? Looking at just social media, you wouldn't be able to get the full picture, but you would get a pretty good picture, a pretty good idea of positive or negative. Can I help you, sir?
Is this the AI?
Sure, yep, come in. And your name, sir?
My name's John Barbera.
John, I'm Dave.
Hey,
We're just starting out, so it's good you join us. So we're talking about what natural language processing is right now. So again, human sentiment is a great way to tell if somebody likes your product, if somebody likes your service. And if you can take a quick snapshot of that on a very large data set of people, it drives your decision-making process. Politically, in business, in your learning. If you say, well, hey, I want to learn something new about cloud computing. Is it a big thing right now? Well, you can actually get a sentiment of how many people are learning and like cloud computing by doing some analysis or by getting feedback from companies that do this type of analysis. So it's a great way to just get a general idea of what's happening in the world or what people think or feel. One thing I've been playing with lately, this is really interesting, is, and Carol, since your sons are software engineers, they would find this of interest. Being able to generate software code. So if I want to write a program, and I'm not a programmer, you could explain to a machine, you could explain to a natural language processing system, I want to write code that does X, Y, Z, and the output is this. And if you're able to articulate well enough what it is that you want, the natural language processing system will write that code for you and will run, it'll execute in whatever language you want. So that's a very powerful tool and a quick way to do something that generally takes lots of training, many years of trial and error or understanding of math and science. You can summarize that in words and get a very quick result. It may not be extremely complex, but it gets you started. And somebody that's not a programmer, or maybe a programmer that's learning a new language or a new framework, can jump into something much quicker and not have to learn it by reading through books or going through school or doing the typical learning procedures. My consulting company, we write blogs. And lately we've been using natural language processing to write blogs, to help us write the blogs. So creative writing is expensive. If you go out there and hire a creative writing individual or a company, they can charge you upwards of $10,000, $15,000 to write a technical blog that explains how to do something hands-on or that explains something complex. And we found that if we use these services, we can now write a blog in maybe 30 minutes and then fill in the gaps. And now we have a pretty good quality blog, and it's unique, and it's not plagiarized from something on the internet. It's actually a unique thing that was written. And if you go and try to generate it again, you'll get a different blog, different sentiment. You can tell it, well, it's too technical. Can you cut back on the technical aspect and do a better job explaining, maybe overall the concept of what you're trying to talk about. And it'll regenerate your blog again and give you the voice that you want to hear. So that's a pretty powerful tool. Quizzes and tests. I haven't used this, but I've read that some educational institutions are actually taking topics, books, complete series of courses, and giving them to a natural language processing system and saying, give me a quiz, 10 questions, and make it a difficulty of, say, medium to high for all my students based on the current learning curve, like how they're doing in the class. And it'll generate a quiz for them that's better quality and actually really challenging the student. And it can even be individualized based on the students, how well they're doing in the course or how poorly they're doing in the course. So you can actually tailor it by student. So what are the practical uses of natural language processing? We already talked about these, requesting data from your assistants. So Alexa, Siri, Google, etc. Most of those are, practical in the sense like, hey, I want to know what the weather is, or I want to know an event that's happening locally or something like that. But the complexity there is pretty basic. You can train that system to give you more complex answers, and it can learn your general habits, what your buying habits are. I've had my Alexa tell me like, hey, you're probably running low on something that you typically order every month. You want to order more of that. And I don't prompt it to tell me that. It's just doing it based on my normal consumption. So it does that on a very basic level. Summarizing books, news, conferences, sports. There are services out there that will summarize books for you. There used to be a service when I was going to school called Cliff Notes, and the company would just consume, lots of books, lots of information from schools, and they would sell it to students that want to quickly study something. Nowadays, you can do that with a natural language processing system, and you can tailor it to the type of learning you are. So that's a pretty powerful way to consume information. News, like I said, it's sentiment. If you wanted to get the general sentiment of a certain topic that's happening in the world, an event, then you can get that from a system that goes out there and looks at all the different news channels, all the different sources of information, and gathers a general sentiment of what's happening. I mentioned the writing blogs. Marketing agencies are now using NLP systems to create ads. So if you want to create, let's say, a Facebook ad or a LinkedIn ad, you have to come up with something catchy that's going to get somebody to click on it or to buy whatever product it is you're selling or service. Now, if you can write that and do the creative writing part of it quickly and put the ad out there and maybe put 5 different iterations of it out there and say, I want to do an A/B test and I want to see which ad is most effective with a certain group of people. Well, now you can create 5 different iterations of that using an NLP engine, natural language processing system, that will do that for you. It'll just create those different iterations. You mentioned the language translation. There used to be a lot of services out there that would translate English to Spanish or to French or any other language, or people that dedicated their professions to that, and that still exists. There's still communication majors out there that work for the Department of State or different agencies that need some kind of translation. But typically now, like written text, websites, they're translated by systems that are automated, AI systems. Maybe more complex things like creative writing might be still done by humans, but for the most part, it's done by machines now. You mentioned the social media sentiment analysis. This is done a lot in the business world, especially if you're selling a product and you want to understand how people perceive your company, your product, around the world even, like if they say specifically, well, I want to know how people in Europe feel about our product versus people in America. And that is a thing because you have to market it differently. It's a different, group of people that have different lifestyles. Chat bots. I'm sure all of you have been to a website and you've had a chat bot come up and say, do you need help? And you can type in, yes, I need help. I didn't get my order. Or you can tell it, I hate this company. You guys are terrible. And then it'll respond in some way. But that really depends on how it's been trained. So a lot of effort has been put into chat bots in the private sector, but also in the public sector. So I used to do some work for the Navy, and they had a lot of AI chatbots for engineers that had questions about specifics on an aircraft part or the maintenance on an aircraft, and they can quickly just type in, when was the maintenance done on this aircraft? Here's the model number. Here's the details in the aircraft. And it would spit out details on what that aircraft needed or when a maintenance was done or when the next failure might happen. So there was a prediction analysis done on the back end using artificial intelligence that would say, well, you've done the maintenance on a regular basis, but after doing it 10 times, the 11th time, you typically have a failure in XYZ part. So you should go ahead and change that out before that failure occurs. So that predictive analysis is all happening in the background as you're keeping track of all this maintenance. And the dealerships are also using this kind of thing. So that it's a pretty amazing thing to do and keep the customers happy and be safe as well. I've done a little bit of this unstructured data classifying. So companies and sometimes individuals store a lot of data. It could be tax records, it could be payroll, it could be, you know, anything really you can think of that, you know, business keeping track of, or organizations keeping track of. And all this data is stored, and there's other data stored as well that may be related to it, but you don't have that relation set up yet. So there isn't an explicit relation between two pieces of data, but if you provide that data to an unstructured data classifier, it can tell you, well, this individual is related to this tax cost because they live in a different state in California. So it'll make predictions based on where they live or why the costs are higher for that employee versus someone that lives in a different state. And all that can be done without someone actually relating the two bits of data together. So unstructured data classifying is a big thing in business. Even creating you know, quality analysis or spreadsheets of information, that can be done in an automated fashion as well, depending on what it is. So there are various models out there, and today we're going to be looking at the OpenAI model. It's public, and you can actually go on openai.com and register for access to their model, and you can actually use it and type requests into the model and get feedback. It's limited. They give you a certain number of credits, and then after it runs out, then you know you have to pay, and it's pennies. I actually have a paid option, and it's really low cost. I think I spend maybe 50 cents a month or something like that. So we're going to look specifically at OpenAI, but Google has a research arm, and they've developed a natural language processing model called BERT, bidirectional encoder representation from transforms. There's a lot to that. I'm not going to go into the technical details or the mathematics behind it, but basically what that means is that when BERT is analyzing, let's say, a sentence or a paragraph, it's not just analyzing the sentence how we would normally read, left to right. It's analyzing the sentence from various angles. So it's taking a portion of a sentence saying, you know, the cat, and it's looking at the cat, but it's also saying cat, the, and all the words before that, and saying, what does that mean together as a sentence? So it's analyzing various components of whatever it is you're giving it to analyze, and coming up with a sentiment or a, you know, the tone of whatever it is that you're trying to say within that sentence or that given, you know, paragraph that you're trying to give the AI model.
So Watson has been doing this for years.
Yes.
I think when they used the machine against Jeopardy, it was good.
Yep. So these models have actually been out there since like the 1950s. Some of them. And they've been, you know, changed or iterated on, and I mentioned that in here. There's so Google actually found that Carnegie Mellon had a really solid model, and they took the worst things of BERT and they built that into the Carnegie Mellon model. So that in the AI community, there's a lot of open source and a lot of sharing, because taking what you learn from one model and how it performs, and maybe, you know, taking the shortcomings of that model and adding it in with another model can give you a better prediction or a better feedback loop on what it is you're trying to do, what it is you're trying to analyze. So OpenAI, going back to that one, that was a project that was initially started by Elon Musk and has gone off on its own, and now is an actual business entity. It was a nonprofit. And they basically took a large amount of data from the internet. So they analyzed a large amount of natural language data from the internet to come up with a model that could understand and make predictions on what someone was trying to say. So if you want to write a blog, I'm going to go back to that just because I have the most experience with that. And I tell it, I want to write a blog about natural language processing and how it's affecting the world. So it'll take that small bit of data, that's that sentence, and it'll generate more topics on that. So maybe headers or something to show a progression in what it is I'm trying to write. And then you specify the headers that you want. And I'm going to walk through an example of this and then actually write that blog for you and ask you, is this on par with what you wanted to write? So it kind of fills in the gaps and then asks for feedback on, you know, am I going around, am I writing this the way you want me to write it? So that's the way that one works. Some of these other ones are not exactly meant for that purpose. Some of them might be meant for finding bits of data really quickly, kind of like Siri, when you ask for something. The model that the AI Institute put out there was specifically for language translation, and then it kind of morphed into various, purposes. But the OpenAI model is specific to writing for you, or creative writing. And now they're also doing something called Codex, which is, completion of code. If you want to write code, they'll help you actually write code. There's some examples here of various projects out there. Facebook Research has one that I don't know too much about, but I put it up here just because it's gotten a lot of attention lately. XLNet was the one I mentioned that was kind of a derivative of BERT, the Google BERT. And I mentioned OpenAI. Their current release is GPT-3. I'm referencing GPT-2 just because they've done a lot of lab research with this one, and it's open source, and you can actually look at all the source code and see how it works. The one that I use for business is WriteSonic, and WriteSonic is just it's a wrapper around the OpenAI GPT-3 engine. And I use that for writing ads, writing blogs, just general, things that I would typically have to pay an agency to do for us. So I'm gonna jump into one of these examples. And I'm going to do one for programming. I'm not going to actually run the code, but I'm going to show you how it can take something like this, where you're telling it to do something to translate a programming language, but I'm going to do something different. So we're going to come up with our own request. And before we do that, though, I'm going to mention over here, there are various models that have been trained in different ways, and you can actually select all of those models here, and they give you a quick, reference to why this model has certain strengths or weaknesses. This one's specific for language translation, classification, sentiment. So I'm going to stick to DaVinci. And you can also set a length, which is the number of tokens you use. I'm just going to up it a little bit so we can get full output. So if we wanted to write a program, what could we write a program about? I'm asking everything. So give me some input. What would you want to do?
Well, the classic one's called.
That's an easy one. It'll do that for sure, but I want to think of something a little complex. I've done stuff like write a Fibonacci sequence that's recursive in Python, and it'll spit it out for you. But specifically, I can say something like input the date. Let's do this, specify what we want there. In Python, input the date, today's date, and tell me how long I've been based on my birthday. Add something to that. Somebody throw something out there random. And give me today's weather. I don't know. Today's weather. That's pretty random, right?
Would you want a time span, like how many years ago or something? Oh,
You know what? I went into the wrong preset. Let me back up real quick.
So since today's your birthday. No. How does it know, according to the birthday, how does it know what your birthday is?
What I wanted it to do is create a Python script that would request my birthday
Question.
and then go through and input everything and then output what I'm asking it to do. But I selected the wrong one here. Text to command is what I wanted. All right, let's start over again because I forgot what I did. So in Python,
Is there a certain languages you can pick, or is it just like?
you can do anything. I know Python, so when it spits it out, I can say, all right, that looks right to me. But if you have another language that you want to see out there, you can do JavaScript or you can do something else.
I mean, does it have to be interpretive, or can it be like Fortran or C, or?
I've never tried that. You want to try that? Sure.
I don't know if they'll do it.
In C language. that inputs birthday and gets today's date, then tells me how old I am. Provide today's weather. And I'm throwing that in there just because it's kind of a curveball and doesn't really, like, why would you add that in there? I don't know. You could put anything in there really, and it might pick it up. It might say, I don't know what to do with this, but I'm going to extend this length out. And by the way, again, these tokens are the amount of processing time that you're going to consume on their end to actually come up with this output. And if you limit that, you're not going to get the full output. It's going to cut it off. So they bill you based on these tokens.
Yeah, I was gonna say, did it pay per token or whatever?
It's per 1,000 tokens, and I want to say it's like 0.2 of a penny or something. It's a really small amount, but when you first sign up, they give you 600 tokens, I think. And then depending on what model you use, it consumes more or less tokens, depending on what you're asking it to do and the length that you want. Like if you want to write a blog, it's quite a bit of text to feed back to you, and it takes more time processing it. So, consumes more. See? I did it a long time ago in college, but I'm trying to remember.
Figure your libraries up front. And set date values.
It's like
Like
the
that.
time
I don't know where, so
system date.
for how old you are, and then current weather, I'm not sure where it's gonna get that from. Some character weather, scan. This weather, I don't know.
No, see, this is why Python is a little better at this stuff, because there are libraries out there that will say, there's an existing library that will go out there and grab the weather for you, specific on the location and all this other stuff. But maybe C doesn't have that. So it's
No,
saying
it
just
probably
input it.
doesn't, so, yeah.
So, but for the most part, from what I can tell, I mean, I'm not an expert C programmer, but this part is pretty close to what you want to calculate something. And what I've used this in Python probably about a dozen or so different times because I'm too lazy to go out there and try to figure it out on the internet. I want to quickly get a response and I want to get a program finished, the script finished quickly. And this gets me about 80% of the way there. It's not always accurate, but if you, what I've noticed is if you go back and iterate again,
I mean, in my old days, we used to write stuff in C and decompile it so we learn assembly language. So I mean, it's kind of the same concept.
so you can actually continue this and continue typing like, can you change it to do something else? And then hit submit and it'll take what you've done and iterate on that. It uses it to build on whatever it is you're asking it to do. So it's like you're talking to it, telling it, do these other things.
So what would you say? Like, can you use Python instead of C?
Sure, you can try it.
Change it.
There is a conversion option, which is the one I was in. Oh, well. It's not what I want. You know what? I'm gonna need to be more literal and say,
Yeah, in the late 90s, there was a language that came out called Smalltalk, which was supposed to be kind of natural language based.
I have. I've never done anything with it.
Didn't go over there at all. Internet has made natural language a lot more powerful.
No. Yeah, they actually have a translation. I have to wait till it finishes. Just cancel it.
Just the two of us, or is there people?
Carol's on the call. So,
Well, you let your kids know about this, because now they can cheat on everything.
right. There's a bunch of examples in here, but there is a translate engine here.
It's there, yeah.
So this one will actually, you'll take the output of what we just did, put it in there. And we could probably try that actually. Paste that in there. Answer sequence. I just saw a message down here that said the codex is in beta and you have to request access to it, so I won't be able to convert that. But anyway, that's there if you get access to it. I was going to do another one. Let's see. There's a Q&A, there's summarize for a second grader. Never use that, but that'll be good for my kids.
From the programming language perspective, I mean, have you used it a lot, or how?
Like a dozen times or so.
Yeah, I mean, has it, what's the quality of it? Is it
80%,
80%?
roughly, yeah. Sometimes I get something out of it and I'm like, why is it telling me to do this? And again, it's based on the internet. It's based on people's responses in forums. What's a solution that somebody put on Stack Overflow or some other website where programmers go to get answers.
Right.
And then the programmers rank the answers. They give it a thumbs up, a thumbs down, the ones that are higher. I'm sure the engine probably sees that and says, hey, looks like the right answer. I'll put this in my, toolbox. Like this is a way how to program something. So I think there's more to it than that, because when you train these engines, these AI engines, you're not training it to store a solution. You're training it to predict something. So when it sees language, when you're asking it to do something, it predicts, okay, well, I think they need this type of output, and it'll put what it thinks you're asking for. So it's not a stored sequence. Whereas the internet, you're like, I need this thing, whatever that term is, And if Google goes out there and tries to find that exact term or variances of that term and gives you that response. That isn't AI. That's more, hey, I'm going to find whatever's closest to what you're looking for. So this one, I've never tried this one. Explain a piece of Python code to a human. This is the social media sentiment. So if you take a piece of a bunch of Twitter output, people posting about different things, you can dump it in here and it'll tell you the general sentiment of the people that have responded. And it's pretty basic. It's not, super advanced yet, but there are organizations that use that to, make decisions on how they're perceived in the marketplace. I'm gonna do, let's see, friend chat. This is just like a chat bot. Plan to do for July. Okay. If I have to put you in front of it. And this is kind of it's not an actual word, but I'm going to see if it picks up on it. Consider adjusting the prompt or stop sequences. Oh. Let's take that out. Okay, I screwed something up. Not working. I'm going to skip this one just because I don't want to sit here and debug this. Let's see, we'll do. How many of you used any kind of language translation? Like you speak one language and then you ask it to translate it to a different language. Carol, have you done any of that before? Does anybody speak another language?
No, but I've used it on Facebook. Sometimes you have to translate what the person's saying.
Okay, I'm just wondering if we had a fluent speaker of another language, like if they could look at it and say, yeah, that's pretty accurate.
No, I'm not fluent.
Okay. Bug fixer. I've never tried this one before, but it can actually fix your issues in programming language. I didn't even think of this one, but turn by turn directions. Sure, why not? It's pretty generic questions, but if I keep
You only have 7 instead of 8.
Oh, you're right. I wonder if it's because of the maximum length. That's what it is. There we go. There's the 8th one. Yeah, so cutting off the amount of time for the credits that you have will always kind of not respond completely, and it's hard to, I have trouble estimating like, well, how many credits should I actually tell it to use? Because you don't want it to run up the bill and, charge you a bunch of, but I've never had it charge me more than like 50 cents or 75 cents, so it's pretty low cost. This one's a pretty basic one. There's some other examples in there. Mood to color, that's interesting. Micro horror story creator. These are all really random, like capabilities of the AI engine. Two-sentence horror story. Never tried that one, but that's. All right, so I'm going to jump into Write Sonic, which is basically the front end for everything that we're using here in this playground. And this playground is just meant to be exactly that. It's a playground. It's not meant to be a full iteration of the AI engine. But this company, Write Sonic, there was a young creative writer that found it really hard to write blogs, and he said, well, this open AI thing came out, and I need a better way to get more writing out there, because that's how he made his living. So he came up with this concept of writing using this AI engine, and we found it to be really beneficial and saved us a ton of time. So what I was going to do is pick a topic and have everybody's input and see how accurate or what you think of the actual outcome of this blog. So let's pick a topic. Anybody throw a topic out there? Anything you know about, or anything you might search for on the internet, or doesn't really matter. I mean,
Sushi.
okay. Sushi. So what about sushi? How do you make authentic sushi? Something like that.
What are the ingredients in making sushi?
The first part is you generate some ideas, and it gives you 3 or 4 ideas, and you can specify down here. I want 5. And what works really well for me is when I train the rating. So this is what you want your topic header to be. And the header in a blog is really important because the search engines rank you higher based on the words that are in that header, that topic. So what's the catchiest one in here? That's a pretty good one. Oh, let me go back. I don't want to select it yet. I'm going to say that's rated a 4. This one's pretty good too. Is everybody good with that? Yeah. Then I'll pick that one. Now this is the part that kind of starts to narrow down the writing style, the voice, and you read through these, and this is what sets the stage for like all the headers that you're going to have in the rest of the blog. So pick one of these. Tell me if you have a preference.
And that last one.
is good or bad?
Good.
So we'll rate that higher. I'm gonna rate this one kind of high too. So which one do I pick, first or third? Any preference?
I like the third one.
Okay, go with the third one. Article intro, this is what we got, or this is what we just selected. Now it's gonna generate an outline, and it gives you a chance to edit it and add any words or delete words or change the tone. So we're gonna generate the outlines. And I typically do select the individual outlines. You can do groupings, like they select the groupings for you. But I'm gonna do this where we can just, select everything that we like in this list. And these are just gonna be subtopics, and it goes into more detail with each one of these. So I'm just gonna pick, use the best ingredients. Use the right type of rice.
Yeah, I guess temperature would be right.
Where's that?
It's up in the top. Right there, fourth line down, make sure the sushi is the right
Okay, yep.
temperature.
Okay, so we got 4. I'm gonna add like 3 or 4 more. Use the right kind of fish.
The right kind of rice, yeah.
Roll with care, the bottom line. We got 8 headers, right? And this lets you kind of rearrange them, move them around. Take that one first. Down there. Okay. This takes a little bit of time. Sometimes it actually times out. It's because there's a lot of lag between OpenAI and this front end system. So while that's working, with all this discussion on natural language processing, what are the implications of using something like this? And it's really in its infancy right now, but think of long-term. Somebody's a creative writer and they're looking at this, you're probably thinking, well, this is not good. Is that the right sentiment to have, or do you think it's actually a good thing? Or anybody have opinions on that?
Well, I think this is the natural organic thought process, so I think that's a negative. Positive is if you need to get something out there quickly, it's fine. Because it's a good way to get something out.
So you're saying the creative process that you go through to make that, to make a blog or to write whatever, a story, you feel like you would lose, like humans would lose that in general, just not being able to do that as often?
Well, I mean, it's like a canned solution. You lose the natural aspect of the thought process. So, everything's going to be 5 different things. I mean, computer technology is based on patterns. AI is based on patterns. So what you're going to get is you're going to get the most common patterns to answer a question. Humans don't do different patterns, but we don't know what's different patterns. It's going to force us to speak in theory, but it's going to the best patterns, the most common patterns, or more than the best, the most common patterns are going to become the standard. It becomes groupthink after a while, and pretty soon you lose that creativity. Well, right now we get rid of it because everybody's creative, but as the world becomes more AI oriented, that subset of what's good is going to be smaller and smaller, and we're all going to think the same way.
People rely more on it. I get what you're saying. And I thought about this too, and I've done some reading about the creative aspect. Think of like Shakespeare or something, somebody writing, say, something complex like Shakespeare. What influenced that writing in the creative aspect of it? Is it past readings, life experience? Is it something natural with Shakespeare? It's a combination of all those things, right? And then when you go to do something like this, where is it taking, like you said, it's a pattern, but it's taking that from the creativity and the things that are out there on the internet, publicized. Are they the same things that we would read to learn about how to make sushi? And sushi is, you take different steps to do things and you could add some flair to your writing. For the most part, you're just explaining the steps or what's good or what's your opinion or something. But the creative aspect is a really hard part to generate in AI because it's complex. It's really complex. Think about it.
Plus, that's not how computers work.
It's not how they work, but people's minds do work in probabilities, and you make decisions based on your feeling or the sentiment of something, or how something affects your sensory data.
But we learn as we go, and sometimes computers don't respond. So I think of the old war games where at the end, the computer realized they couldn't make it.
When we train, something that you said in the last, and we're proving it, doing some of the labs, the training is more important than the actual algorithm. Because then you introduce a lot of things. You introduce bias, you introduced a larger set of ideas, and the system that you're training to do something, there's always going to be a bias in it. It's the same way a human, depending on where you grow up, depending on the education you've had, depending on the books you've read or the experiences you've had, you create biases and ideas the same way an algorithm might, to an extent. Maybe not always, but the feeling aspect is the one that's really hard to grasp. And OpenAI actually has a project for creating art. And it's a really interesting concept because they don't use randomness, they use existing artwork. They take that artwork and then the human would tell OpenAI, I want to create a rendering that might look like Vincent van Gogh of that style, but I want it to have these types of patterns or objects or feeling, and you can input all that, and the OpenAI will generate a unique artwork based on what you're telling it to do. So does it have feeling in what it is you created? Or is it just predicted, like it's something that's been generated based on existing data, there's no sentiment applied?
Yeah, media and technology, it's all system generated. So I think the computer labs and you can get without putting bias into it. And that's going to be the creators bias. So
Again, there's a lot of controversy behind that because if the creator is creating the thing that's having the algorithm, then they're going to put their bias into it, right? To a certain extent, maybe mathematically you can't. But
it has to be built upon by the original owner. So,
but when you're training it with data, for example, image data, like remember last time we did some of the image training, it's when you start with an algorithm that doesn't have any bias and you feed it certain types of images, now the algorithm is biased based on your image selection. So the larger your data set, the larger amount of information you're feeding it, the bias gets smaller.
well, you've already created bias by what sources it goes to get information.
Right, your data, the training that you provided.
So the training you provided already has bias as it is, but for it to know to go to those locations or those sources, okay, whoever developed it had created biases as it is. So like even programming languages, you can only eliminate my programming. So there's set requirements that create bias into the original construct. So is it good? It could be. Is it bad? It could be, depending on who created those biases. and you see it now actually in a lot of the search algorithms that are in the search tools. You know, 20 years ago, I used to get stuff that would pop up in searches. Now I don't get all that stuff because they filtered all that stuff out. And
Based on paid ads or?
based on paid ads or whatever else. And there used to be a really neat search engine out there, I think it was called Modo or something like that. It was really cool, it did content search. So if I did a search on dog, okay, it would come back with different links to different types of dogs. So it might be big dogs, it might be breeds, and it might be, it was the coolest search tool that you ever could have out there. And it's gone.
There's a really interesting book that we talked about, and it's in the library. I've checked it out before. Life 3.0 by Max Tegmark. This is a really good book that talks about the creativeness, the sentiment, the consciousness, and not so much the algorithms and but basically how do you, what is consciousness? How do you create something that can think for itself? This is a really good one, and it brings up a lot of controversy in many ways, but it doesn't focus so much on the mathematics and the algorithms, which is a really good, it's a good topic to talk about. And we talked about it during the first session. But I recommend that one. That's a really good one. So I think we're probably going to get kicked out soon.
Yeah, she just gave that.
So if you guys want to just quickly.
Dave,
Yes.
we created this paragraph. Can you put a graphic in there of what a sushi might look like?
Yeah, there actually is a way to do that. I haven't figured it out yet because I just started using this recently, but
See, I could use this in teaching my third graders. They could pick a topic and then we could generate sentences and they could make their own paragraphs.
I apologize. I actually just erased it.
And that's
So
all
we
right.
can't
I
read
mean,
it, but
We're getting kicked out.
and we're getting kicked out.
No,
Yeah.
no, not at all. I was just, I'm gonna do your AB breakdown, so.
Okay,
we
yeah.
Close at 8, so give me a couple minutes to do that.
Sure.
Okay.
All right. So yes, there is a way to introduce images. I haven't done that, but so like some of these other options down here that have like Instagram captions, and there's another one that's video specific, landing page headlines. These will actually include images that are related to what you're writing about. I'm not sure the blog does that, but I know these other ones do. And I haven't played enough around with all of these, but it is part of it. And they just have a few different data sources because you actually have to pay for images. They don't allow you to just capture any image out there on the internet because now you have some copyright issues. that pop up.
okay,
So
yeah.
it's kind of limited. But there aren't any copyright issues with this. They claim that everything you write is unique, and if you generate it once and you try to generate it again, it's completely different copyright. So you can actually take what you've written and claim that it's yours because they claim it's unique every time you do it. The different iterations of it.
Since they helped you build it, can they claim copyright on it too? or-
No. I read through that because I've had copyright issues before, borrowing an image here, or copying text from something else. So that was a big concern of ours because we don't want legal issues,
So how would you claim that? Can you make a copy after you've made your selection?
Yeah, not through Right Sonic, but you
Okay.
can through other legal avenues. And they basically absolve any rights to it. And they tell you, you can just take it and run with it the same kind of way that stock images does. Like they let you use their photos. They have a licensing, section that you can read how you can use your photos. And I believe they do have like a terms of use also on how you use their copyright. Or how you use the writing that's generated from this. So, and there's another one in there that's like ads and some other things, and there's specific legal things to do with the ads as well, because if you use like another company's trademarked product name or service or something like that, they actually give you warnings when you do something like that. Like unless you're a partner with this person, you can't use their naming convention or their product name. But yeah, I haven't used probably like 90% of this. I've only used it for blogs, and it's been helpful. It's not perfect, and I usually have to add my own, my own images, my own examples, or maybe even change the tone of a sentence. But for the most part, it's pretty advanced for blog writing at the very least. But that's all I had, and I can share these slides for the examples. OpenAI is free. Like I said, they'll give you a certain number of credits if you want to go in and play around with it. Write does the same, and it's perpetual. You can actually re-up your credits every month, so you can go in and like play with it a little more. I urge you to go back and read through the Max Tegmark book. It brings up a lot of great questions. This Facebook project has a lot of good Q&A, like what they're doing with their search algorithms. There's a lot of controversy behind Facebook, so it's actually enlightening to read how they're doing it and what their AI engine does. But that's pretty much all I had for the evening. Does anybody have any like questions or topics that they want to quickly discuss before we close out tonight?
No, what you did today, it's more, I see more Microsoft. Like when I took the VC class in Viva, instead of programming, you just programming.
Oh, the visual aspect. Yeah, yeah. That is a popular way to create like user interfaces and make something functioning that you don't have to be a developer to generate. I've never used it, but I heard it's actually pretty good.
What is that?
Visio,
I use Visio all the time.
not Visio. What's it called? Is it Visio?
Do you use it to create code, or what do you use it for?
This is in a TV set.
Then instead of a writing program like we do in Java, it's kind of like they gave you certain things. You go there, click, you go to the property, and you click the stuff, and then the program automatically choose.
You create the workflow and then you generate.
Yeah, so I mean, that's,
Yeah.
that'd be, I didn't know
Is that
that,
something different than the AI?
I didn't know Visio offered that feature, so. Yeah, I'll have to check into that. I'm kind of curious
I
about
didn't know that either.
it. Because, I mean, in the old days, when you learn how to program, you basically did the flow charts. And then from the flow charts, or I learned on something called Warren diagrams,
Mhm.
you would build out your whole processes and then write code from that. But it sounds like it automatically converted code. Did it do a certain language, or was it doing Java, or was it doing?
I wasn't sure what language that was, but when you click, it was some kind of program just on the side. It just automatically changes whatever you click on the property.
Yeah, I'll have to look into it. I have
was a-
Visio.
Yeah, I was awesome.
So you had a couple of these sessions. I'm sorry, I missed them. I signed up for them.
That's okay. The last one was probably the most technical, and some people didn't really capture everything with it, but we did go in like deep dive into a lot of the different labs that AWS put out there for Sagemaker, which is just an AI engine, and that was more around like image recognition. And we can share that. We posted it in the chat. I don't know if you have your Zoom logged in or not, but we recorded this, so it will be in that.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, originally I signed up for it, and then all my calendar invites disappeared. I don't think there are some